We've all heard the advice to never rent because you're throwing money to the wind. This episode of Stewardship discusses whether or not that advice is true for every person in every situation.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is Stewardship, a show that gives you the tools you need to get the most of your best resources. Your money, your mind, your body, your time.
Welcome back to the Stewardship Show. My name is Troy Solomon Levy, and I am your host. I often hear people say that they aren't making any more dirt, so you should buy as much real estate as you possibly can. And the thought is that real estate is a very precious commodity that does not become available every single day. So when you do have the opportunity to purchase something real, some real estate, some land or something like that you should jump at the chance of doing that. Now, the question is, does that cleanly translate to home ownership? And should you purchase a home at all costs when the opportunity arises? The short answer is no. Now, as much as I love home ownership, and I've been a homeowner twice over, it is not for everyone at all times. There are definitely certain situations where you should strongly consider renting instead of owning your own home. Here's the first one. The first situation where you should strongly consider renting instead of owning a home is if your rent is dirt cheap. Now, this happened to Rochelle and myself when I finished grad school. I got a job on the other side of the country where thankfully my wife had family. We moved in with her parents as soon as we got to that state. And let me tell you, it was a blessing because they owned a multi-family property and their whole top floor of that multi-family was pretty much vacant. You had one sibling who lived there kind of part-time, kind of came home on the weekends, but for the most part, we had the space free and clear. Now, when I say free and clear, just in terms of space, it was not free. However, the rent was dirt cheap. And when I say dirt cheap, I mean $600 a month. And we're not talking about in some kind of southern rural area. We're talking about in the backyard of New York. We were in New Jersey. So $600 a month was dirt cheap for that area. And we lived there for 4 years. And in fact, living there helped us to build up our down payment to purchase our home. Renting for those 4 years was definitely a blessing. My only regret is that we didn't save up even more money than we had done for our down payment. Now, it may not have been as much of a blessing if we were paying market rate for that apartment, northward of $2,000 or so a month. Maybe that wouldn't have worked out well for us, but $600 a month was dirt cheap for the area that we lived in, and it was a big blessing. I'm glad that we rented at that time in our lives instead of buying. The second reason why renting may be better than purchasing a home is if you'll be in the area for just a short time. In that case, if you know you're not going to be there, and we're talking about 3 years or less, flexibility is more valuable than the future equity that you could gain in home ownership. If you need to up and move at a moment's notice, maybe you work in the military or maybe you work in a certain job sector where you need to pick up and move at a moment's notice. I'm not quite sure what those job sectors might be, but I know that they do exist. Then your flexibility is going to be a lot more valuable than building up the future equity that home ownership provides for you. So if you know that you're not going to be around in that area, in that geographical location for more than 2 years or 3 years or so, then that may not be the best thing for you to purchase in that area. A third reason why renting may be better than buying is if real estate is just sky high in that area to purchase. Now, this can be especially true if you're choosing to live in a downtown area of a city where, of course, the closer you get to the center of the city, usually the more expensive things become, especially in today's real estate market with gentrification and all those kinds of things. Being close to a downtown and just being in the city, period, can be very, very expensive. So many times it can be more advantageous to rent instead of buy. Now, renting as a long-term plan, maybe life will change and your values change. But if you happen to decide, hey, I want to live in the downtown section, or I want these certain amenities, or I want to be close to work because my job is downtown, or whatever the reason might be, it may be better to rent instead of buy. Now, some of the things that occur when you're purchasing a home that can be extremely expensive are, again, the price of the home, but not just that, property taxes can be a major expense, especially in certain areas of the country and in certain cities. So if real estate is just sky high in your area, what you would have to give up now for the sake of future equity is just too high of a cost for you. A fourth reason why it may be advantageous to rent instead of buy is if you're intentionally downsizing. Now, three groups of people usually are intentionally downsizing. The first group are retirees. The older you get, the less you want to deal with certain things that come with home ownership. Or if you do own a home, you don't want to take care of a larger home with a larger yard and larger responsibilities any longer. So downsizing can be a great plan, but as you downsize in between the larger home and the smaller home, many times it can be great to rent in the meantime while you figure out what you really want and what you really need. This actually happened to my grandparents as they are retired. They downsized from a 5,000 square foot home to a 1,000 square foot home. Now, they did not rent in the meantime, but they could have if they really wanted to. And for people who are moving to a new area as they did, many times it would be pretty wise to rent instead of owning immediately, because this gives you time to understand the market. This gives you time to understand where you really want to live, because if you haven't really lived there before, you really don't know the area. You may have visited, you may kind of jump on some of these websites like Zillow or those kinds of things to try to make a decision, but you really don't know the area unless you've lived there for about a year or so. So many times renting in the meantime can be a very good thing if you're downsizing and moving to a new area. Another group of people that can sometimes intentionally downsize are parents whose kids move out the house. Now, these are empty nesters, and I can be honest, if you don't mind, I am so jealous. I love my kids. I love spending time with them, but I think it's just a cool thing for your kids to move out because they're at another stage of life, which means that parents are at another stage of life as well. So if your kids move out, that usually means that you don't need as much space for them as you previously had. I'm not mad if you hold on to your space or have a larger house, even if they move out, that's okay. But the fact or the reality is you usually don't need as much space any longer. You don't need as big of a yard. You don't need as many rooms or as many bathrooms or as much kitchen space to cook for the kids that seem to have an empty pit in their stomach. I mean, it's just crazy dealing with kids. So empty nesters can oftentimes take the time to downsize, and that is okay. The third group of people who many times intentionally downsize are people who are divorced. And let's be honest, divorcees, those who are divorced, the family dynamics can just be a bit different. Sometimes they do still have kids, and sometimes those who are divorced do still need the extra room because kids are between parents. But many times that is not the case. Many times those who are divorced can intentionally downsize. And one of the reasons for that is that you are usually all of a sudden coming from a 2-income household to now having a 1-income household. And many times there is a need to bring the levels of expenses down because of that situation. A fifth strong reason to rent instead of buying a home is that you don't want the responsibility of upkeep. Now, I'll tell you, this is probably one of the most annoying things of home ownership, because once you stop renting, everything now falls on you. You have all the responsibility of upkeep, of fixing everything up. You got to mow the lawn. You got to repair. It's a lot. It can be a lot. And if you no longer want that responsibility, I'm not mad at you. I definitely understand the dynamic. Repairs and maintenance can cost hundreds of dollars every single month, which translates to thousands of dollars every single year. And if you downsize, or if you decide that, hey, renting is a better option for me instead of owning a home for that specific reason, that does make sense. And the last and final reason why renting may be better than owning a home is that you don't have the money for the upfront cost of home ownership. And this is usually the biggest hurdle to purchasing a home. There are a lot of upfront costs, and these upfront costs are a lot more than the upfront costs of renting. Yes, there are upfront costs of renting, but it's nowhere near in comparison to the upfront cost of home ownership. When you're purchasing a home, you have the down payment, you have the closing costs, you have the origination fees, which is basically the fee that you pay the mortgage company just for the privilege of borrowing money from them. You also have the prepaid items such as taxes and insurance. Those things can add up to tens of thousands of dollars just for the upfront cost, and you haven't even spent not one night in that newly purchased home. Now, I shared with you in the beginning of this episode that it took us 4 years to save up for our down payment, and our rent was dirt cheap. Again, my only regret is that we didn't save up even more during those 4 years. I don't regret the 4 years at all. The time that we spent living at my parents-in-law's multifamily, those were a good 4 years. I just regret not saving even more money. I wish we were more disciplined in our saving. I wish I knew what we had during that time when our rent wasn't as high, so that we could be even more further along in our journey of building our financial house. So here's a shift for you. And this is especially a shift for people who are at a special time in life. Maybe you've recently gone through a divorce or going through a divorce, or maybe you're an empty nester, maybe your kids moved out, or maybe you're newly retired. Make a decision right now as to what you want to do in terms of renting. Remember, home ownership is a great blessing. It can be a great blessing if you do it right, but renting isn't the worst thing in the world, especially if you're in one of those periods of life that I described in this episode. So a small shift is if you're in one of those situations in life where renting could be more of a blessing for you at this time than home ownership. Take some time to analyze your situation. Take some time, maybe even to pray about it and discuss with your spouse or with those that you really, really trust, and make a decision as to whether or not renting could be the best thing for you at this time. In the meantime, check out my video on why purchasing a home is better than renting.